Oh, and the one other thing, Ben, for you, and then I'll shut up and let you teach your class, is I think I emailed you the other day about bringing in these Southwest Virginia Community College students.
Yes.
Well, our Blackboard lady, she's fairly new at the job, and she hasn't successfully gotten them brought in yet. I emailed her again this morning about it, so they may be behind and need a little bit of love and forgiveness when the time comes.
Okay.
Okay. Otherwise, I'll shut up and let you run your class.
Thanks for that, Tom. Sorry for the technical difficulties this morning. I don't know why my camera wasn't working, but all right. We're here now, so that's what matters. How's everybody doing this morning?
Good.
Good. Wanted to start off just asking about first the lab. Does anyone have any problems with the lab? Are you able to access it? We have is everybody on board there?
I've got mine, so just haven't submitted it yet.
Okay. Yeah, so we have one submission. So you guys remember the first lab is due on Wednesday. So if you haven't already taken a visit to 2 purveyors of food, then you need to get on that. Of course, probably going to have to give a little leeway to our new students in Blackboard. So given that, I think it would only be fair to give you guys a little bit more time as well. Does anybody have any questions about that? Comments, concerns? You guys know what you're doing?
Mostly up until the paragraphs part.
Which part was that, you said?
The part where we were supposed to write 3 paragraphs about what our realizations during it.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be writing about, just like our experience with it.
Yeah, so anything that you learn from doing the lab. So, for instance, something that I found startling when, kind of doing a similar thing is that, well, for instance, a lot of our food, especially in the off season, comes from the southern hemisphere and not from anywhere near us at all. So I'm hoping that you guys might find some similarities and differences between food found at like a local grocery store or a mom and pop deal or a farmer's market versus a national food chain supermarket kind of deal.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions about that? Makes sense to everybody? Just nod your head if you're following along. And if you're not, then just have a frightened look on your face. No? Okay. All right, well, how about chapter 1? Did everybody get through chapter 1 okay?
Yes.
You guys good over there?
Yeah.
Alberta, you good? Questions about chapter 1? So what I was hoping to do here, and with some of Tom's input, since we have some online students, I think we're going to try to put the quiz up on Wednesday and then have it due. I think probably for the first one, we'll just have it due before class on Monday. That way, you think that will give our online students enough time, Tom?
Oh, yeah, that should, because a lot of them don't do anything till the weekend, and that's when they do everything. So
if we make it due, prior to our class on Monday, then hopefully that will give them time, and then we can have a few minutes to discuss the quiz and see if anybody messed anything up. So right now I figured we would do just a little bit of review about what's going to be on the quiz, so you can maybe study again a little bit. Again, it is going to be kind of open notes, really open book too, but it will be timed. So maybe 10 questions worth 10 points apiece or thereabouts. Some of them might be a little less or a little more. And we'll give you about 30 minutes to complete it. So that gives you time to look at your notes and look at your book, but should make it to where, you don't have enough time to just look through and find all the answers. That means that you should have already read the material. You should have taken notes during the online lecture too. So let's start off with a little bit of review there, going back to kind of the history of agriculture. Who can tell me, who remembers when agriculture began? Anybody?
Was it 10 to 14,000 years ago?
Yes, thank you, Megan. In the book and kind of in those lecture notes, it says 10,000 years ago, but one of the things that I wanted to add there is that it is actually 10 to 14,000 years ago. And remember, that's not just immediate, that's kind of over time. Another thing along with that, it kind of occurred simultaneously around the world in different places. Was anyone able to kind of look up that Vavilov's Centers of Origin and Diversity? I would recommend checking that out, and I'm going to see if I can just pull up an image for you that kind of shows that real quick. Yeah, there's a few images on there. If you do a Google search, talk a little bit about the 8 centers of origin. So I'd like for you guys to know where those are and what came from them, if possible. Let me see if I can pull up this image here. All right, I'll put this link up too. Let me share my screen. All right, can you guys see this?
Yep.
It's a little small. I'm going to try to make it a little bit bigger if I can. There we go. So here's Vavilov's 8 centers of crop origin. And they're numbered in no, particular significance. That might be just where he started. Number 1, China; 2, India; 3, Turkey; and 3 and 4 kind of Middle Eastern; 5, Mediterranean; 6, Ethiopia; 7, Mesoamerica / kind of Central America; 8, the Andes. So if you look down here, and I'm going to put this link up on Blackboard. Tells you exactly what crops came out of those centers of origin. So the Fertile Crescent, we have wheat and barley, flax, lentils, so on and so forth. Also a lot of kind of perennial crops, such as figs, dates, grapes, depending on your zone. Africa, we had millet, sorghum, yams, watermelons, okra. Chinese had also millet, rice, buckwheat, and soy. Southeastern Asia, we have these various fruits and some grains. Mesoamerica, we have a lot of things. Remember the cultural exchange there. Talked about maize, squash, beans. Something that's not listed here is also from South America. We should have tomatoes listed there as well. Potato, peanut, cotton, also maize. So that would be good to memorize what came from where. There will probably be some sort of matching or multiple choice question based on Vavilov's centers of origin. Questions there? Comments, concerns, gripes, grievances? Everybody good?
You said you were going to post a link, right?
Yeah, I'll put this link to this website that I just showed you. I'll put that on Blackboard right after class.
Okay.
Be sure to review that. The next piece, wanted to touch on the whole sustainability thing again. What are the 3 pillars of sustainability? Anybody? 3 components of sustainability and things that we have to examine for the future of agriculture in our world. 3 words, really. We talked about this last week, didn't we? I know it was jam-packed, so I'm just going to say it again. The 3 words we're looking for, the 3 P's: people, profit, and planet. Those refer to economic sustainability, that's the profit part. Environmental sustainability is the planet part. Of course, social sustainability is the people part. So be sure to know that. And really, we're kind of linking this to the growing global food crisis, which you might think is not really a big deal right now, but if you read in the book, there are definitely some major issues that we're going to have to come to terms with. What are those major issues? What is causing a potential global food crisis, you all?
Overpopulation.
That's the big one, overpopulation, which they're projecting by 2050, the world population will be over 9 billion people. And it's going to become increasingly difficult to feed a growing world population. As you may well know, we already have people starving in parts of the world, right? Even here in our country, even in the United States, we have issues. Even though we're, a rich country and we have tons of land, tons of food, we still have issues in getting that food to people. So recognize that overpopulation is one of those big issues that's going to be escalating that global food crisis over the coming years. What else?
One of them was loss of farmland, right?
Yeah, loss of farmland. Most of the arable land in the country and in the world is already being used. And you guys might not see that in your part of Virginia. I definitely don't see it here because there's lots of abandoned farmland that really is not being used at all. However, most of the arable farmland in the world is already in use. What do we mean by arable?
Farmable.
Yeah, farmable. And really, the big thing about arable is that you're able to take a plow to it and plow up the soil. Now, if you look at that, of course, here in Southwest Virginia, we have a lot of mountains. That being said, we might have farmable land, but it might not be considered arable, really because of the whole issue of you can't plow it. You can't really work the land by machine. You might be able to by hand, but you might not be able to by machine. So that's another issue feeding that global food crisis. One more big thing that I'm looking for, and that's the one some of you are probably like, well, I don't know if it's real or not.
Global warming.
Yeah, which I prefer to use the term climate change. Because really it's not always just warming. It is warming at the poles. Of course, we've seen a few years ago, I don't know if it was like this in your area, I'm sure it probably was though. You guys remember the polar vortex? So you might have been in high school with that, when we had basically sub-zero weather. That it was very unusual. What's your hardiness zone over there in kind of South Central Virginia?
What do you mean by hardiness zone?
The USDA agriculture zone. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Oh.
Number?
Oh, I used to know that. We talked about that last year, but I can't remember.
Yeah, you guys you might be a little bit warmer than us in the mountains. We are, by USDA standards, technically a 6B is our zone, but during that polar vortex, we were actually more like a 5, or almost, pretty close to a 4 actually, because we had temperatures down in the negative teens. Zone 6 means that it's supposed to get as low as about 0. But we were getting temperatures at our farm and nearby was a low of 16 below 0. killed a lot of vegetation that was supposed to be suited for our area. I'm going to see if I can pull
search for like 7B seems to be the prevailing for over here.
Yeah, that sounds right. Did you guys
Okay, yeah, Emporia 7. Yeah, I think about all of us the 7B.
Did you guys experience that kind of loss of plants in your area too?
Yeah, I remember that. We had a couple of students that they lost some plum trees and grapes, because we had some grapes coming through that got lost.
So that's somewhat related to climate change, because while that was occurring on the poles, like in Alaska, for instance, their temperatures were in the 50s, which is unheard of. So basically what happened is a warm air mass moved up over the North Pole, and that basically pushed all that cold Arctic air down our way. That's part of a kind of a climate change issue. I'm going to share my screen again here just to share with you the USDA plant hardiness growing zones. If you look up a map, it will show lots of areas, and I can see where you guys are. You're more of a 7, and here we are more of a 6 right here. Everybody see that?
Yeah, the Keysville, South Boston are like 7A, but going out to Alberta and Emporia and South Hill, all of that 7B.
It's pretty crazy how much that changes. The USDA tries to update that on a periodic basis, but they're basing it on climate data that they've recorded for the past 100 or so years. So anyway, that's kind of related to climate change. And again, it's up to you guys really whether you believe that that's human cause or not, but you do still have to recognize that it is happening. What other kind of crazy weather has happened for you guys over there? I remember last week we talked a little bit about the Gatlinburg fires and how, I guess that was 2 years ago now, in November, it was incredibly warm and dry. I mean, we were still having days in the 80s in November. Something you want to recognize along with the kind of hardiness zone, and something you might want to take note of, is your first and final frost dates, which, what are we coming up on here pretty soon? Is that the first or final frost date?
First frost date.
Yeah, it's the first. Do you guys know what it is for your area? What is it for you, Megan?
I believe it's sometime either late November, early November, or late October.
Yeah, that sounds right. For us, we usually say that it's October 10th to 15th, somewhere in that week, first to second week of October. But that particular year, and actually the past 2 years, it's been in November, which for us it's a really good thing, because it adds potentially 30. And if you look at the final frost date in spring, it was also about 30 days earlier. So that adds 60 days to our growing season, which in our area is about 165 days. For you guys, you're probably looking more at like 200 or 220 days, since you're a little bit warmer. But think about that. That's what governs your growing season. That's probably going to be a question on the quiz there. What governs your growing season? The first and final frost dates. Of course, there are things that you can grow after frost. We were just doing a fall plant sale here in Virginia Highlands, and with that fall plant sale, we were selling a lot of kind of cold hardy vegetables, things like greens like lettuce, cabbages, kale, stuff like that can actually take a frost, and some of them even a heavy freeze. They can still continue to grow, especially if we protect them. So think about what governs your season. For some of you that like to grow tobacco, for instance, or corn or cotton, all of these crops are governed by those frost dates. They cannot handle any frost. It will kill the crops. and effectively end the season. So that's a huge thing in governing our, kind of plant science and technology. All right, so climate change, anyways, it's a big deal. And again, it might be cyclical. There are lots of people out there, and there's definitely science that shows that it is naturally occurring. There are waves of wet weather versus dry weather, warm weather versus cool weather. But I think you have to recognize that that's occurring probably at a more rapid pace than it has in the past. But that's another thing that's kind of fueling this potential global food crisis that is kind of burgeoning on the horizon. And really, I mean, it's kind of starting to occur right now. Of course, another thing that we also talked about, we shortly discussed, and it looks at a little bit in the book in that first chapter, is the whole economics of it as well, right? Industrial countries. Can anyone tell me what the number one developing nation in the world is right now? Just take a stab in the dark. I'll give you a hint. It's one of those Nikolai's Vavilov's centers of origin. Anybody want to guess? Come on, Keysville. I see you got it. You got it on your face there. Good guess, but no, it's not number one. It's number two. India is the most rapidly developing nation in the world right now. They just recently surpassed China. It was China for quite some time. But that's going to change the economics. If you think about it, for instance, India is a nation overwhelmingly not completely vegetarian, but they don't eat nearly as much meat as other countries do. China, of course, is consuming more meat than ever, so they're relying on more imports of meat. India, on the other hand, is driving more of the produce economy. So you have to look at that and think about how that will kind of change the economics. Of course, last week we talked a little bit about the tariffs that are looming, and I guess some of them have already been put in place, and kind of the subsidy packages meant to kind of deal with some of those tariffs. But it's a huge thing that people are talking about in agriculture right now. If we have these trade tariffs, then how is that going to affect the economy? It's not just about food supply. It's about food supply and food demand. As I'm sure Tom preaches much in his classes, right?
Yes.
All right, so working with this global food crisis, what are some potential solutions that we've been working on? And one of them is kind of the 2 or 3 letters, the big abbreviation there. That big food technology, anybody?
GMOs.
Yeah, GMOs, genetically modified organisms, or what was the term I preferred? Not GMO, but GE, genetically engineered crops. And there's probably going to be a question on that on the quiz. It's better to use the term genetic engineering versus genetic modification. Again, because a lot of scientists will argue, well, all of our food crops were genetically modified. We bred them, right? We've been actively breeding our food crops ever since the agricultural evolution. So genetic engineering occurs in labs, and you guys look in the chapter, some of those instances of genetic engineering that are taking place. Check out the lecture notes again, and that lecture PowerPoint. I'll try to pull it up here, show you guys again. How do you all feel about genetically engineered crops? Let's just go around. I just want to see what you guys, what's your perception of them? Are you would you eat them? Raise your hand if you don't mind eating a genetically engineered crop.
My hand is up, but you can't see it.
All right. So you guys are a little bit different than the public. The public perception, for some reason, is frightened about genetically modified organisms. And yeah, I'll raise my hand too, because yeah, I don't really fear eating genetically engineered crops. Of course, it depends on what they are, engineered for. Can anyone tell me what the #1 genetically engineered crop is? And it's not just a type of crop, but a type of genetic engineering across basically all of our subsidized crops now. Anybody? Yeah, go ahead, Megan.
Is it pest resistance?
You're really close there. Not pest resistance, but pesticide resistance. Roundup Ready is the largest genetically engineered crop, and they've got it in corn, soy, wheat, and even beets now. Did you guys know that beets were a subsidized crop? Yeah, beets are where the vast majority of the country's sugar comes from now. It used to be sugar cane, but it's shifted to beets, at least in North America, because there are very few places that we can actually grow sugar cane in the country. Anyway, Roundup Ready crops are these that have basically had been genetically engineered so that they can be sprayed with glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup Ready. So you can basically spray a whole field with the herbicide and kill just the weeds. So basically the idea is that makes crop production more efficient. There have been a lot of other kind of GE crops out there, and there's still some that are, on the horizon. That is by far the majority. You don't really see produce in the grocery store section. That's something I wanted you guys to look at in that lab too. Do you think that any of the foods, any of that produce section stuff is genetically engineered? Probably not, really. There was they called it the flavor saver tomato. They talked about that in the book too, in that chapter. And they actually put down a reason why the flavor saver tomatoes disappeared. It was out of fear that the altered gene would maybe affect people if they consumed it. Actually, that wasn't it at all. I think the book is really incorrect on that. The reason that was really abandoned was because they tasted like cardboard. Nobody wanted to eat a tomato that tasted bad. So kind of a totally different reason than what they originally talked about. And really it's kind of an interesting issue because we can genetically engineer these crops to do better, but if they don't taste good, people probably aren't going to buy them, right? Let me just show this slide. This is one that you might want to pay attention to. And this is slide 40 on that PowerPoint, chapter 1 from the book. The public has shown negative responses to GMOs. Fear that the Roundup Ready gene will escape and create resistant weeds. And that's actually been documented. For instance, pigweed, hogweed, this specific species of amaranth, has become what they now call a superweed. It is resistant to glyphosate now. Some people thought the monarch butterfly was threatened by BT corn. BT corn is corn that has basically produces its own pesticide inside of it. So when insects feed on it, they die. Golden rice, there's concern that it could basically escape from the beta carotene gene from the genetically engineered rice into the wild rice, and also the flavor saver tomato that we just talked about. So check out some of those slides and reread over that genetic modification stuff in the book, because there will be some questions on the quiz about that. Another couple of things from that chapter I wanted to briefly cover, and you'll probably see again here on the quiz. One is the whole issue of the scientific method and scientific inquiry, right? So look over that again. I mean, the steps, know what the steps are of the scientific method, because basically that is how we've experimented and how we figured out a lot of the modern technology that we have in terms of agriculture. A lot of this plant technology comes from the scientific method. So step one, identifying the problem. Step two, formulating a hypothesis. And step three, testing that hypothesis. Step four, interpreting the results. And finally, step five, reporting the results and possibly creating some technology that deals with disseminating and using those results for positive effects on our food system. Another big thing here, and you guys probably cover this in a lot of different classes in high school and at college as well. But let's pull up this slide here too. This is just about the measurements. For accurate experimentation, we have to understand the units of measure. Of course, we have various systems, right? We have the universal system, the old metric, the SI, the US system, and then the conversion. So know some of these units of like length, area, volume, and mass especially, and what we use for them. And of course, note that the US system uses different measurements than the international system, the SI system. I would prefer to use the SI system myself, and of course, for any scientific literature, it's almost always listed in the SI system. Although we use the US system every once in a while as well. All right. Finally, the last thing they really start to talk about, they mentioned conducting experiments and reporting findings in that chapter, and we're going to kind of segue a little bit into what we're going to be working on the next chapter in the whole ecology aspect. And actually, it's interesting. My undergraduate work was actually, my degree was in environmental studies with an emphasis in agroecology. Agroecology is basically looking at agriculture and ecology and kind of combining the fields of study. And it might seem kind of frivolous to look at it this way, but really all of our agriculture is still working with ecology. Can anybody give me one thing, one ecosystem service that is provided by insects, for instance, for our agriculture? Anybody? Just one word.
What would insects do to help with our plants? Begins with P. Begins with the letter P. Ends with the pollination. What?
Pollinate.
Yes, pollination.
Yes.
That's what we came up with here.
Correct. Pollination. And what conducts pollination in our crops? It's a big buzzword these days, right?
No. Oh, the bees?
Yeah, the bees. Of course, the imported European honeybee does a lot of that pollination, but also there's all kinds of native bees. There's butterflies that do pollination as well. So that's just one huge thing that insects do for our agriculture. It's kind of funny to look at because most of our commodified crops, subsidized crops like corn, wheat, soy, they're not insect pollinated. Soy is to a lesser extent, but it is self-pollinating. However, almost all other crops that you would especially the ones that you're going to see in the grocery store during that lab, most of those are insect pollinated. Squash has to be pollinated by insects. All of your tree fruits have to be pollinated by insects. Otherwise, they just don't have the same yields. So that's one part, that an ecosystem service that is through insects that otherwise you think, hey, I like to get rid of insects, right? Well, you don't want to get rid of them all because you want the bees to be able to pollinate your crops. The other big ecosystem service is to take care of pests. Who's had problems with pests in any kind of agricultural endeavor in the past? Let's get a show of hands. Probably everybody, right? Insect pests, maybe mammals as well. Yeah, maybe all of the above. So fortunately, we do have some ecosystem services that take care of pests. For instance, insects eating other insects. The good guys eating the bad guys, right? Bats, for instance, we found at one of our plots that we were studying in my undergraduate in Arizona, we found that bats were very responsible for eating a lot of the insects that preyed on our crops. Kind of the beginning, they really just touch on ecology in this chapter, and they go more into it in the second chapter. But I'm going to share this other slide here, and it is slide 11 in that PowerPoint that accompanies the book, Chapter 1 PowerPoint. Again, you guys can find this stuff on Blackboard. Take a look at it. It's about the flow of energy through, or as they put here, emergy. Embodied energy, the flow of embodied energy through ecosystems. It all begins with photosynthesis, right? Plants. And then through respiration, that energy moves through ecosystems and eventually into the food chain, food web, into our food chain. All right, so that pretty much covers everything that we're going to talk about and going to be quizzed on. Again, I'm going to put that up on Wednesday. We'll have it due the following Monday before class. And that way that'll give me a chance to grade those and see what issues there were. And I always want to try to spend at least a few minutes going back and looking at some of these issues that maybe you guys got wrong or right. Mostly just to make sure that everybody's on the right page when it comes to exam time.
For the record, the seated students, are they going to be taking it on paper, or are they going to be doing it outside of class in Blackboard?
I think we'll just have everybody do it on Blackboard if that works.
Okay. So they're not going to be doing it during class?
Right.
Okay. So y'all need to wrap your minds around that. If you don't have a computer or something, you'll need to find some time to get to the computer lab with your notebook.
Is that a problem with anybody?
Not here at Keysville. It looks like everybody in Alberta has a laptop right now, so I think they're covered. So.
Well, since this is the first one, and since we're doing this from a distance, let me know and a timely manner if anyone has any issues with the quiz or anything, so that we can get that worked out before the due date, ideally. We'll try to go easy on you guys the first round, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. But I think that'll be better if we all do it through Blackboard. That way we can get it automatically graded and make sure that it's complete before class, so we can, before we discuss it in class, that way no one gets an edge. Does anybody have any questions about the material that we just talked about? All right, so quiz 1 will be up on Wednesday. Check it out. The big thing before Wednesday, finish that lab. And again, if you have any issues, just email me. You can do that through Blackboard, or you can just send me an email either to Highlands email address, or ideally to the Southside email address. All right, well, looks like class time's about up. Anybody have any last-minute questions, comments, or concerns? Gripes or grievances? I'll ask you that every day, pretty much. If you have any grievances, you'll have to file them with Tom there.
Yay.
Just kidding.
Yes.
All right, well, y'all have a good one. Thanks again. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Hopefully on Wednesday it'll be a lot smoother.
Okay. No problem. See a lot of y'all in the next few minutes. So, bye.